Hello and welcome to How to Be a Better DM, a part of Session Zero Studios. My name is Tanner Wayland, and I'm going to help you learn how to have a great time playing as a DM and, also improving your game. So today's topic, we're going to be talking about loot. All the loots. Just kidding. We're going to be talking specifically about kind of a debate, or rather different styles is probably a better way to put it, of distributing loot to your players. And I'll kind of give a little bit of context here. I have been reading a book recently. It's a lit RPG. It's called Dungeon Crawler Carl. You may or may not have heard of it. That's fine. But it's kind of one of those classic tropes of like, oh, everybody on Earth gets thrown into this multi-level dungeon and, they have stats. They have like equipment. They grow, they get achievements, and they get random loot boxes, that kind of thing. And a big part of the story I noticed is like, oh, what are they getting for loot for these different achievements? And, when they beat certain bosses. And that kind of like creates the story. Or sometimes it's super random and you're like, oh, that's kind of fun. Or conversely, sometimes it's like, oh, he gets this piece of loot that he's been looking for, or that is kind of a running joke throughout the story. And it made me think about being a DM, because we have that choice, right? We have the choice to be very purposeful with our loot and with the items and equipment that we give our players, or we have the chance to kind of be a little bit more random, a little bit more funny with it. And I kind of, in my head, I asked, which is better? And I also came to the realization pretty quick. It's like, you know what? It doesn't matter which one's better. There is no better. It's whatever style of game you're playing, right? Do whatever the heck you want. But for the sake of this episode, understanding that either way is totally valid, there are still some considerations. There's some reasons why you might choose a more randomized system of giving loot and drops and equipment versus a more personalized approach. So let's talk about some of those differences and, the pros and cons of each, right? And now let's just start out with randomized. This is, if you look online, there are so many wonderful tables that, players can roll on, that you can roll on, that will help you decide what goes in a box. Or you could look up a pre-written adventure where it's, basically everything feels random to you because it's just pre-assigned, right? Either way, it's not you thinking deeply about like, oh, should they get a piece of equipment or not? It's more random. It's less purposeful, but it does have its own purpose, right? When you randomize loot, or if you make it not tied as deeply to the characters and the characterization, then sometimes you can get more fun or spontaneous choices, right? That change the flow of play. There are certain magical items that have completely random effects. For example, in our recent in our Pact and Boon campaign, one of the characters, Lethodus, he has a backpack with various patches that you pull off, and they have different effects. And that's a class. There's many examples like that. There's the deck of many things. There's a lot of things that are more random. They add some fun or some peril to the play style of the party, and that's kind of fun in a way that you could think of that for your characters, but it doesn't usually have meaning, right? You don't give them something that's like, oh, it has so many random effects, or yeah, you don't use shields, but here's a shield. You don't do any of those things when you're being very personalized with how you give out loot, because you're like, hey, I could give something of more value that either tells a story or that's very cool or works in with their archetype. But when you randomize it, it keeps players on their toes, and it can provide rather some fun and spontaneous times if you fully embrace that. Also, if you do use a random table to roll loot on, that's another dice roll for either you or your players, which is very fun as well. It's always fun having more randomization, because I mean, as much as I like knowing whether my dice will work or not by planning things to a T and, min-maxing my character however much I want, that is fun. But it's also fun when you can make some rolls that there's not necessarily some bad ones, but it's just neutral. You could get really good, you could get really useful, you could get funny. Having another dice roll is awesome. And then, for a very good DM, which I believe all of you are, even if you get something random, it gives you a chance to bend the narrative in unexpected ways and to add a storytelling reason for why they got that random item, right? If you really want there to still be some meaning, but you kind of want to have some fun, do a little bit of improv, then randomizing your loot can be a really fun way to do that. It gives you a chance with every loot drop to tell the players and come up with whatever you want and be like, oh, this is why there's a cursed sword in here. It's because of this tragic backstory that I just came up with, or that I came up with just before the session when I was kind of randomizing the loot then. Either way, kind of a fun experience. And let's say, one of the concerns I hear often about fully randomizing your loot is the worry that players will become OP, just overpowered because they get some really cool loot early on. Like, oh, I got a +5 Vorpal sword or whatever. And you worry it's going to break the game or make one player so much more powerful than another. That's another opportunity to flex your improv muscles as a DM and be like, okay, so this is interesting. They got a more powerful item early on. What can I do to balance the game again? And you could make it so like, oh, you're now cursed. Now there's a big old powerful enemy that's after you, and they may come sooner or later. Or before you unlock the powers of that thing, you have to go on a specific quest that's pretty rough and that, has multiple parts. And there's a seal on your weapon until you get rid of all these different quest lines, right? There's multiple ways to do it. But I think that it is not such a big impediment, like the overpowered concern. It's not so much that you can't overcome if you really want to go with a randomized path.
Thanks again for listening to our show. If you like our content and would like to engage with more of it, head over to our Instagram account @HowToBeABetterDM and give us a follow. Make sure to watch some of our Dungeon Master Rules videos while you're there to give yourself some more structure and procedure as a Dungeon Master. Also, don't forget to reach out with a DM and we can talk shop and I can get to know you a little bit better. Thanks again for listening. You work 8 hours a day. You spend time with your family, and when you come home, you do work around the house. And it seems that you never have as much time as you would like to prepare for your D&D sessions. Does this sound like you? Wouldn't it be amazing to have endless material prepared for your D&D sessions anyways? That's where Roll and Play Press comes in. Roll and Play Press provides D&D 5e compatible material for any type of session. Running a one-shot? Check out their One-Shot Wonders book with over 100 one-shot ideas. Getting started with a new sci-fi campaign? Get their Game Master's Sci-Fi Toolkit to have your games much more prepared with much less effort. Why reinvent the wheel? Check out Roll and Play Press at rollandplaypress.com, see what they have to offer, and get a 10% discount when you buy something by using the code BETTERDM10, that's BETTERDM10 at checkout. Give yourself just a little bit extra help so that you can continue being the world's greatest Dungeon Master. You obviously have good taste. I mean, you listen to How to Be a Better DM, after all. We thank you so much for your support. And if you've ever gotten anything useful from How to Be a Better DM, take a minute and rate us and review us on your podcast listening app of choice. It goes a very long way to helping our show help many more Dungeon Masters out there who are just like you. If you love our content, help others become better Dungeon Masters too.
But let's talk about personalized equipment giving and why you might want to do that. First off, as I've kind of hinted at here and there, if you really care about the story and your characters and you have a more handcrafted approach that way, if you guys are really into the role playing of it all, then personally, thinking about what piece of equipment would be perfect for your players, that's a great way to approach it, is just, looking at what your players need, because that's part of it, right? If you randomize it and your players are continually complaining, let's say you have one player who seems just bored with their fighting style. If you randomize stuff, yeah, they might get something that makes that more exciting. Or if you were taking a personalized approach, you think, okay, they obviously need a new fighting style. They need something that, like, they don't like the fact that they just shoot an arrow or, swing a sword every time. They want some variety. They should have probably chosen a magic class. They didn't. So let me help them out by giving them an item that gives them that variety that they're craving, right? It also is great for story arcs. If you're personalizing the equipment, then you can make it so, like, oh, not only is it a piece of equipment that improves your AC and everything else, but it also tells a story that you were already planning on telling, and you get to wrap that all up into one grand narrative by sprinkling the equipment as if it were breadcrumbs along the way, right? And of course, there's creativity on this side too. As much as I talked about, randomization gives you a chance to improv and think on your feet, personalization gives you a chance to be very, very thoughtful and creative, because you're probably going to do what I've done a lot of times. You're going to look at a list of items that are out there in D&D 5th edition, and you're going to think, oh, what should I do? You get a great chance to think a little bit deeper and multi-layered when you're trying to personalize it to a specific character or to a specific party, because you get to be like, okay, I like this item, but does it fit? And if I feel like it doesn't, how could I make it fit? Or is there another item that would work better? That's a great question that will really evolve your ability to tell a story, because it makes you think at a deeper level. Now, of course, it does make more time. It takes more time to do all this. If you're randomizing, it's like, oh, it's on the fly. If you're personalizing, you have to think about it ahead of time. You have to think, okay, where are these items? Am I giving them often enough? And is it a good time for the players? You just have to be more purposeful, and that takes more work. But on the other hand, I think that it is a more direct way to answer your players' needs, and to maybe respond to their feedback, is by that personalization. Because you're like, oh, I've noticed this about them, or they've said this a few times in various sessions, that they just wish that they could swim better. Or, oh man, their play style is they like to get high up and it just takes them forever. You can answer those things and be more responsive with a personalized approach. But in the end, as I mentioned earlier, for both of these, randomized or personalized, there is no right or wrong. Rather, there is a right for your campaign and wrong for your campaign. And oftentimes you can mix them as well. What I mean by that is, if you're playing in a campaign with a bunch of players who like just a good old classic, dungeon crawl, and, like they just want to go into a tomb, go down a few levels, fight a boss, get a bunch of loot, grow their characters that way, and they're not super crazy interested in NPCs and role playing beyond a basic level, then that's fine. Honestly, Randomize is kind of hilarious. It's fun. It makes the experience more bright in a certain sense, and I think that's very fun. It also works very well with the campaign where people aren't too precious with their characters, and they're fine with, oh yeah, they've only gotten bad equipment, luck of the draw / I wasn't intentionally trying to keep them alive with the loot I was giving. If the players are fine with that, with losing characters and creating new ones, then that's a very fun approach as well. But if you are in a party that cares a lot about story, or you do personally, and you like to weave these narratives that are grand, that are personal, that have a lot of like story arcs and everything works towards a certain purpose, then you're going to want to use that personalized loot giving system to support that. Because I'll tell you right now, if you are very purposeful with the story and with your characters, but then you fully randomize the loot, sometimes you can actually undercut your story, and you can lead characters to be like, oh, do I need to add story reasons for why my character would use this or why my character would want this? Then, it can muddy the water a little bit. But like I said, you can kind of use a bit of both. You can mostly randomize, except in certain instances where it's like, oh, this is a key item I want them to have. Or, I see that player specifically needs, better armor. Then I'm going to throw them a bone. I'm going to make sure that they get more armor. So you want to do a bit of both, right? But above all, more than, whether you do personalized or randomized, always make sure that your loot is cool, interesting, and useful, and you won't go wrong. So keep that in mind. Think about how you divvy out loot in your own campaigns and whether you should lean more one way or the other. And until next time, let's roll initiative.
Brought to you by Session Zero Studios. For more information, visit sessionzerostudios.com.